Alchemist. I probably need to make this bigger, right? Do 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 do. Tequila. So you can see how many. This is the reason I limited it to only attack skills. Look how many there are. It's kind of ridiculous, right? And I colored them differently, so it's a little easier to see. This is pretty easy to see. All right, so it looks like they go in alphabetical order. So it looks like we're starting actually the Arcanist ones are kind of hard to read, but hopefully you guys can read them. I should have picked a different color. Like this one's a lot easier to read. This one, whatever. Anyways, all right. So we're gonna go with Calidor's Tempest here first. Arcanist. So Calidor's Tempest is kind of an interesting skill. It's got a really nasty dot on it if you use the transmuter node, which is pretty sweet. It's probably one of the most used skills for time dilation reset because it gives it a 100% chance, just barely. As a primary attack, though, I feel like it's kind of hard to use, and it doesn't really have... It has some support. I guess you can do the Skater build. The Skater build plus Calidor as the two primary attacks is pretty good. But I really like it because I really like time dilation, and it's basically the best time dilation reset. So I'm going to give it an A. I like Calidor's. I like Calidor's a lot. Alright, we got Panetti's. Panetti Spaghetti. This one really runs into the problem of a skill I hate. It's a turret skill. The only time I like this skill a little bit is with the Ludrigan set, where it gives it like some CDR and massive damage and like I think a type 2 resist reduction. But for beginners, this is a really good skill because it's intuitive, it's simple, it just kind of works, it's got a lot of support. If you do Inquisitor Seal with it, you can probably kill most. So PRM, I hate it, but it's a good skill, and lots of people like it, so I'm just going to give it a middle score, just because I hate it. I think objectively it's probably like high A, but I don't like it, so I'm going to move it down. Alright, Devastation. This skill is really hard to use effectively because you have to be really good at like stutter stepping, positioning enemies. You probably use it in combination with something like Calidor's for time dilation, which requires some skill cap work. You can transmute Devastation into like every element in the game, I think, which is pretty fun. And it's visually spectacular, right? Like it's so great looking. I'm going to give this an S. Even though it's hard to use, I just think it's really what you think of an Arcanist, right? Like it's meteors falling from the sky and murdering people. It's just great. Alright, this is like probably my least favorite skill in the game, Alexra's Flash Freeze. It is incredibly good for leveling. Just for like, it can screen wipe, it looks kind of cool, but then you get to a boss and you realize that it's completely useless. And then you get attacked by a nemesis and you realize that it's also completely useless. So for leveling, I can't put it in D because it's good for leveling. But it's also kind of a noob trap because it's good for leveling and then they get to a boss and it doesn't work. I'm going to give it a C. I can't give it a D because it's so strong for leveling. Okay, AAR. This is another skill I don't really like because it's Omega turreting, right? Like this is the turrety of the turretist. But it looks really cool, right? It's a giant death ray that comes out from your hands, which is sweet. And it's quite good. There's a ton of support. It's very energy hungry. So like if you're not ready for the amount of energy it takes, it can kind of take you by surprise. So, and it looks awesome. I'm going to put it above Panetti's though, because it looks way better than Panetti's, right? It looks way better. Alright, Trojans. This is probably my favorite Arcanist skill. I think I like Trojans better than Devastation. It's kind of hard to use, but it's really strong if you're good at using it. It's really good at freezing things. And I think two of my strongest builds were Trojans. Because I like running around like a chicken with my head cut off. But it's not quite as visually spectacular as Devastation, so I don't think it's quite as fun. And it does have a lot of support. I'm going to give it a high A. I'm going to give Trojans a high A. Okay, we're on to Demo now. So we're starting with Fire Strike. This is the only skill in Demo that I don't love. This is the only skill in Demo I don't love. I will say, though, that as far as gun turrety skills, this one looks super cool. that last node that does the chaos damage, it's cool looking. And it's pretty effective, and it's got really good support. It's even got like a melee weapon MI from a skeleton you basically always kill. But I don't really like it, but I think it's just really good. It's good for beginners. It's got a lot of support. It's intuitive. It matches his damage. You can mix this with like a million different classes. I'm going to give it a low A. I'm going to give it a low A. It's like got the support these have, but I hate it less than these two. So I'm going to give it an A. I don't really like auto attack skills. I like skills that are like skill shots where you like, you hit them really hard and then you kind of dance away, or like you have to target it. This skill is like you hold left click, right? That's what you do. You just hold left click. I don't like it that much. I like it better than these though, because if I used it as a melee skill, it's at least not a turret skill then, right? And you can move around and melee things. All right, Blackwater Cocktail. So now pretty much all the rest of the demo skills I really like. So Blackwater Cocktail is just, what a cool skill. It's visually spectacular. If you get it maxed out, it's like a gigantic puddle on the ground. It's versatile because you can use the cooldown version for just a debuff, or you can spam it. You can even spam it with retail attached. I've seen somebody do a build with that. That's very good. It has type 2 RR attached to it, which is really strong. And it's got some interesting conversion stuff now too. And it's really good for leveling. I'm gonna put this in S. I think this is probably one of the most versatile and fun to use skills in the game. It's just got everything. It looks good. It's easy to use. It's intuitive. It's versatile. It's got massive debuffs. There's 2 ways to use it. Yeah, I think that's an S tier skill. Actually, I think it's better than Devastation. All right, Stunjacks. Stunjacks is pretty fun to use. They look cool. Lightning in this game pretty much always looks cool. Lightning has a ton of support. Stunjacks has some interesting MIs, especially in Forgotten Gods. And you can change them into Aether Stunjacks. And this is just like BWC. It's got a transmuter, so you can play 2 different ways. I don't think it's quite as good as Blackwater Cocktail, because while leveling, they're not quite as strong, I don't think. So, I think I'm gonna put it. Yeah, I think I am gonna put it in B above these. It's fun, but it's not quite as intuitive on an effective way to use it. And doing the spam build is a little more dangerous because you got to get kind of close for the shotgun effect to be effective. All right, we got Canister Bomb. My suggestion is don't try and level with Canister Bomb. It's not that it's a bad skill, it's just that early on it feels really weak. Mostly because like the cooldown on this skill is super long at the beginning. Super long. But later on, if you build into it, this thing can put a nasty dot. Especially on really big mobs like Gravathul or Kubacabra, because like they get hit by tons of these fragments. I think I'm gonna give it a high C. No, I'm gonna give it a low B because I really like it, but it's so much harder to use than these. It's probably the hardest skill to use effectively, or second hardest skill to use effectively for demo. I wouldn't recommend leveling with it. Thermite Mine. Okay, so the original version of Thermite Mine would be in its own tier of Omega Dumpster Fire, because these things were cancer to use in their original version, but now these things are so freaking good. They deploy instantly instead of bouncing around. There's tons of support for them. They got new MIs. It's one of the most reliable resist reduction abilities in the game, and they're really good at proccing devotions. They look cool. I think these are S. I think these are low S, not high S. I think these are low S. These are so freaking good. All right, Granado. Granado's a pretty good leveling skill. I recently saw somebody do hardcore solo self-found ultimate demo only using Granado as the main skill, and he crapped all over it. Granado's cool. It makes a really satisfying sound when it hits things. The explosion sound, it's got like feedback, it feels like. It's got a lot of support. Um, the cooldown is kind of long while you're leveling, so if you don't really know what you're doing, you probably need to use something in conjunction with Granado. But I think that they're very powerful. They definitely pack a punch, and they're really good against bosses because they hit really hard against single targets. I'll probably give them a low A. I think these are low A. All right, Mortar Trap. This skill early on is probably the only one that's like less effective than Canister Bomb. The cooldown on it, just like Canister Bomb, is extremely long without certain items. Um, but later on, there are 2 or 3 MIs that you can get to make the cooldown on Mortar Trap almost nothing, and that's when they get good. You can get like 6 or 7 mortar traps all at once, deploy all of them within like 2 seconds, and they'll fire like crazy. It's so fun to watch. Although they do miss a lot if you're not like positioning the enemies correctly or controlling them or something. I'm gonna give this like a high C. I really like it, but man, they're so bad early on, and they desperately need the support or they're useless. They don't miss very much. The only thing they really have going for them is that they're really fun to watch, because they literally just shoot mortars into the sky and they rain down on the enemies. They're cool. So we're just gonna give them slightly better than Olexres, which is, yeah. Okay, Word of Pain. This is secretly the best leveling skill in the game, in my opinion. You can screen wipe with one button. It's ridiculously easy to use. You just need to like build into it. You need certain blues to buff the second and third nodes, and you can basically walk in a park through all of normal with pressing one button against everything except for bosses. It's disgusting. That being said, later on it falls off hard, and its damage is pretty much trash can. You pretty much use it like a Curse of Frailty at that point, where it just is a debuff. It does have the rare Chaos Shred and Aether Shred, so that's pretty cool. It's got a debuff that, you know, if you want to do some wacky builds, it's a good skill to keep in mind. And it's easy to use. I'm gonna give it a low B. It's probably a little better than Canister Bomb. Yeah. Horn of Gandar. This is another skill that like it's kind of hard to use early on, but it still kind of helps you. It's like a crappy Ring of Steel. It does pretty okay damage in AoE, and it does like a confusion effect, which is pretty cool. You can get this to a spam status where you can use it like every 0.8 seconds later on, which is pretty fun. I have a character that did that on my old computer. But it's not really all that strong. You need to really build into it, and even then it's not really that impressive compared to something like Trozen's or Blackwater Cocktail. Honestly, this is probably worse than Alexa's. This might honestly be a D tier skill. I think it is. It's just not really that good. Like, it's kind of similar to Alexa's in that it's probably pretty good for leveling, for protection and stuff, but it's not as good as this for leveling. And then its single target is really weak, and you really have to build into it for it to be decent, like Mortar Trap. And it's not really all that good looking either, so yeah, I think this is kind of not a very good skill overall. Alright, we got Rune of Calistor. This thing has a lot of support. Both of the runes look exceptionally cool. I've had several builds of my strong builds that use Rune of Calistor to great effect. They are hard to use though, but they do work good from the beginning to the end. I think I give them a high B. And give them a high B. They look fun, and they're pretty effective, but they're hard to use. Stormbox. This is a pretty fun leveling skill too. It's good at trash. It's good at killing trash. It's pretty decent at single target. It's not great, but it's okay. The lightning tether is really fun to use, because you can like put the box on the guy in the back and get the lightning tether to go through all the enemies. And since it's lightning, it's really cool looking, because lightning. You can transmute it into Aether to do a totally different style of build, which is pretty fun. It's got a lot of set support and MI support. I think I would rate this like right below the Rune of Calistor. Yeah. Let's see, Rune of Hagarad. This is pretty much the same as Rune of Calastora, but I think it looks a little better. So it's pretty much the same. I'm going to put it right above Calastora because I think it looks cooler, but it's about the same usability and support and whatnot as Calastora. Alright, Flames of Ignifire. This is another turret build. This one's like, this is like the hardest turret build thing to use though, because unlike AAR or Panetti's, you're turreting, but you also have kind of a crappy range. It does look quite cool, so people that like things like AAR might really like it. But I think of like the turret skills, I think this is the worst one. At least as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to give it a low C. I almost want to give it a D, but I don't think it's really that bad. I'm biased against it, so I'll give it a low C instead of D. Alright, Phantasmal Blades. I feel like this is one of the most powerful turret skills. You can do a Vit one that's super high DPS. You can do a Pierce one that's super high DPS. I think you can do a Cold one that's pretty decent DPS. It's good for leveling. It's easy to use. The knives look kind of cool. It makes a really good sound. It makes a nice ripping sound when it hits people, and like a throwing sound. It is turrety, unless you use the cooldown, which means it's not turrety, so that makes me like it more than most turret skills. It is energy hungry if you turret it, so keep that in mind. And it's got pretty okay support. I can only really think of like 2 sets offhand that support it specifically, but I think there might be more. I think I'm going to give this like a low A. It's a really good skill. It's really strong DPS wise. Blade Spirit. Omega S. Blade Spirit's Omega S. It used to be Cancer, like Thermite Mines were back in the day, but when they made them last permanently and be immortal and just follow you around, and they added a bunch of support for them, I think they're arguably the best devotion procer in the whole game, and they do pretty good damage, and you just don't even need to think about them. Like, if you're running through a farm run, everything dies even though you're not even doing anything. These are so good for so many reasons, and it's really easy to convert them to various elements instead of their base. I think this is probably one of my favorite skills in the whole game, and I think it's one of the most usable. Okay, let's see. So Amarasa's Blade Burst. This skill looks pretty cool, makes a good sound. You can use it effectively with both melee and guns, which is pretty cool. It's an interesting maintenance buff if you're not even using it as a primary attack. It used to be that you were obligated to use this as a Nightblade because it had OA attached to the maintenance buff, but since that's been removed over to Pneumatic Burst, this skill went from like something I kind of dreaded to something that I think is really cool if it's good for you. You can also do like spam builds of this to do only this, which is pretty fun. Yeah, I think, and it's really easy for new people to use it. I think the only problem with this skill is that, like, say you're a Blade Master, you're using like Cadence, right? Basically what happens then is that you hold left click for Cadence, and you have to weave this in between your attacks, which is kind of annoying sometimes, but also kind of fun. So, it's kind of a mixed bag. I think overall I would probably give it like a low A. I think it's a little bit below Phantasmal Blades. Just mostly because of the interaction of, if you're using a normal auto attack and then you kind of gotta weave it in, it feels a little awkward. And if you have really low cast or attack speed, it starts getting even more awkward if you're weaving in other skills. Alright, Ring of Steel. This is one of the broken leveling skills. Ring of Steel is super, super, super powerful for leveling. I would say even if you're not using Pierce or Cold or Bleed damage, it's still a good leveling skill because it just AoE stuns or freezes, which is ridiculously strong, right? It's high protection. If you use the Korba set, you can just madman spam Cold Ring of Steels that crit for like 400k. It's ridiculous. I think this is an S tier skill. I think this is like up here. I think this is S tier Ring of Steel. Defense, offense, it's a 1-point wonder that works ridiculously good from beginning to end of the game. And as it looks cool. And it has a great sound. It's just this is just an amazing skill. Honestly, I think it's probably like right here. I think it's better than Blackwater. Shadow Strike. S. Shadow Strike. Dude, if you want to nuke bosses and even AoE when you get tons of support and teleport around the map like a crazy person, this is fun, ridiculously powerful, tons of support, big numbers, puts things to sleep, stuns them. This thing, I mean, honestly, there. Shadow Strike is amazing. It's an amazing skill. It's fun. It moves you. It's just got everything. It's easy to use. It's intuitive. It's got multiple damage types that you can convert to. It's just, yeah, that's a glorious skill. All right, here's the worst. Here's the worst attack skill by far in Nightblade. Yeah. So this skill, when you're fighting weak trash mobs, is very strong. Not quite as strong as Alexa's Flash Freeze, but it can make you just like get uber crits on little trash mobs. But the problem is, when you go to a boss or a nemesis, it's Omega Dumpster. And so it just it's like a noob trap skill. I hate this skill. If they made it like do all the things that it did for just a certain duration, even when the enemies are not trapped, then it'd probably be like an A tier skill. But because it just doesn't really work on the enemies that are actually scary, it can just trap you into being dumpster fire on bosses when trash is really easy, right? So I think this skill is crap. Okay, next is Necro. Siphon Souls. I have mixed feelings on this skill. It's kind of a good debuff. It's got a lot of support things that make it an even better debuff. But the problem I run into a lot of times with Necro is that like I don't have enough points to want to invest a lot to make this really effective. That being said, it's cool thematically. It looks pretty good. It's pretty easy to use. But I always run into a situation where the points are like a huge problem. So I think I'm going to give it like a low B. Like it's pretty good for what it is, but I just think that there's some external problems to this skill being amazing. Drain Essence. I have seen a few builds, particularly like a Retal to Drain Essence build, where this thing can be like really, really crazy damage. That being said, it has all the problems that AAR has and Flames of Ignifar has. You're a turret. The range on it I don't think is quite as good as AAR either, but it can be super, super high DPS. I guess I'm just going to put it in here with these guys because they're all kind of the same. I'm going to put it a little bit below Panetti's because I think it's less good for a new person to use than these two. Yeah. Ravenous Earth. Alright. This skill's super fun to use. It does kind of run into a bit of the canister bomb problem, where like it kind of needs some support to be really good, but I don't think it's quite as bad as canister bomb without that support. It looks really cool. It's got some pretty good support too. The Bone Spike comes to mind, that you can get really easy, really early on to make this skill quite strong, and I like it. So I'm gonna probably put it like right in the middle of B here, below like the skills that I like a little better. Yeah. Alright, Bone Harvest. This one is super easy to use. It looks super cool. It's very effective at single target and AoE. You can convert it to several different damage types. It's got a lot of like support. It's good for both pets and non-pets, which is kind of rare. I think this is like a high A. I don't think it's quite S. I mean, it's almost S, but I don't think I like it as much as these, so I'm going to leave it in high A. This skill is great. If you want a leveling skill that's fun to use, I would recommend this one pretty highly. Alright, Reap Spirit. This is a really cool skill. It takes a ton of energy, and then it summons a ghost for you, which is weird because the Reap Spirit cast is based on player stats, but the pet that it summons is based on pet stats, so it might confuse new people. You pretty much just have to pick one or the other, to be honest. Don't try and make both work unless you're doing some kind of crazy diviner set build and you kind of are experienced. I wouldn't recommend trying to make both aspects work if you are not experienced in the game. That being said, it can be really fun, and I think it's a really fun skill to use as a spellbinder combo. I'm going to give it like a high C. It's kind of like Mortar Trap. Needs a lot of support. It's kind of hard to use, but when you do use it, it's pretty powerful and pretty fun to use. Raise Skeletons. I think this is S, man. To be fair, I'm biased because this is like the only pet build I've really made, and that was only because they changed a set and you could get like 19 total pets using that set, and that made me excited to try it. But even so, having leveled it and played it, this army of skeletons, if you properly support it, not only has extremely high AoE and single target, but because you have so many pets, they're really good at getting in the way, which protects you. It makes it really easy to stay alive as this particular pet build. And they're not really as fragile as you'd think they'd be if you played like D2 or something. So I think this is really, really strong. Honestly, it might honestly be higher in S, but I don't like pets that much, so I'm just going to leave it at the bottom of S. Alright, Ill Omen. This is kind of a weird support damage debuff skill. I'm not really sure. I barely ever use it. It does have some support for like debuffs if you're doing certain kinds of builds, but I feel like maybe those are for builds that I don't really like doing. So I'm just gonna put it like in high C because it's pretty good. I just don't feel like it's really that important. It's just kind of there. It fears things. That's kind of fun, I guess, if you like some necro flavor of making things run away. It's kind of neat. Blight Fiend. So now I haven't used this pet before. This is like on my radar of next build I want to do with the goals set, but that being said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this because I don't have enough context for this skill to rate it. I've heard feedback from people that it's not good as far as pet skills go, but I'm going to try it because it looks kind of funny. It's like a big, fat, acid dirt monster. We'll see. We'll see. I'll have an opinion later, but for now, I'm just going to put it in the I don't know. Alright, Sigil of Consumption. This is probably my second favorite skill from Occultist. It does heal you for an unreasonable amount, which is cool. It has pretty okay support, but a lot of the support that I've found for it doesn't seem to really make it stand out too much as a primary attack. You can layer like 6 of these if you build it right onto a monster, and it starts doing pretty okay single and AoE, but it requires a lot of positioning. That being said, at the beginning it's pretty strong even, like it heals you a good amount even at the beginning. I think I'm going to give it like a low B. I feel like most people probably will really like this skill too, because it's flavorful and looks neat. Doombolt. Alright, Doombolt is fun to use, but it's pretty much Omega Dumpster tier unless you have all of the support for it. Maybe you could level with this as just like a boss attack, and then just like use Dreegs as your main attack, or use Sigil as your main attack, or something like that, but I still feel like it's just not very good unless you Omega pump into it. And then you can get it to be pretty decent. There's also an MI that changes this to be cold and lets you spam it. I really want to try that one, because it looks cool. Yeah, and somebody in chat mentioned that also, like, the target area on it by default is pretty much non-existent. So Doombolt, I'm going to probably put it with Sigil. Actually, it's not even Sigil, right? I'm going to put it in high C. I think it needs too much support to be, like, really, really strong, but it is fun, and it's very satisfying to shoot it down. It looks cool. It's like a big purple lightning bolt, so that's fun. Alright, Dreeg's Evil Eye. This thing has a transmuter that turns it into a nuke that has a big cooldown, which saves it for me. The default version of it is a turret eyeball spam. Also, it's an eyeball. You shoot eyeballs, which is amazing, right? Like shooting an eyeball, that's great flavor. I love that. And I love that it has 2 modes, so I can not hate it. And the nuke mode has a lot of... The nuke and spam mode both have a lot of support, and it's kind of an intuitive thing for new people. I think I'm going to put it, like, in low A. I think Dreeg's Evil Eye is a good skill. And it, you know, shooting eyeballs, what is there to not like? Alright, the Hellhound pet. This pet, when I used it with my skeleton build, seemed kind of mediocre, but the Hellhound itself has an aura that gives flat damage and stuff to your other pets, which to me seems really, really good. But because individually it seems kind of meh, I think I'm gonna probably put it in like low B. This, take my pet opinion with a grain of salt, because I've only made the one pet build, so just keep that in mind. And then familiar is pretty much the same thing as the Hellhound. Like, it has a heal that heals you. The bird itself is kind of meh. It doesn't like get in the way as well as the skeletons to protect you. And it's ranged, which is kind of cool, I guess. So it probably has good uptime on enemies. But I think it's kind of in the Hellhound territory where like it's kind of good, but it's not. It's just not at the same level as the skeletons from what I've seen. Alright, Bloody Pox. I think this is a favorite skill of a lot of people. So, Bloody Pox, this one has, this one's pretty good at proccing devotions. It jumps to new targets. That being said, it's only really good at proccing devotions on AoE. On a single target enemy, it ticks, right? And it doesn't really get a very good like percent modifier in the devotion tree. And it's actually really expensive energy-wise. I don't really like Bloody Pox. It has a pretty strong modifier. If you like retail builds, there is like secret tech on Bloody Pox. You can use the danger node and make all your enemies go freaking crazy. And that gives it a lot of bonus points for me, because if you ever use that modifier on a Reaper Nemesis, it's hilarious. He runs so fast that he like teleports. It's worth doing once just to see it. So I'm going to give this like, I don't know, I'm going to give it like a low B too, because I think it's better than I feel it is, because I don't really like using it for a couple reasons, but its power level is pretty functional, right? And if you're playing the Dark One set too, it gets a lot more functional. Alright, we're on to Oathkeeper finally. Honestly, I think Oathkeeper might be my last or second to last mastery. I don't really like Oathkeeper that much. I think some of the skills aren't as good as I thought they'd be to use. Alright, so Oathkeeper. We're starting with Eye of Reckoning. When they first announced that this skill was going to be in the game, I was omega excited, because I was thinking Whirlwind Barb from D3, right? Which is like such a fun build. But what I found when I made an Eye of Reckoning build is that not being able to go through your enemies makes this feel really awkward. And I kind of just, I did it like twice, and then I just stopped trying, because I didn't really like it that much. That said, it is still kind of fun. It is still spin to win, right? And it's pretty okay power level. You can do like basically every element EOR has pretty decent support, even chaos. So if you really like it, it's good. Another note about EOR is that it is really, really energy hungry, which if you're doing certain combo is a huge problem, especially because you're normally dual wielding, right? So you don't get offhand energy regen. So I would say that most builds on this need to use an Arcane Spark and maybe Tree and maybe Harp, or, you know, some combination of lots of energy regen things. So, yeah. That's, for that, I think it puts it, I'm gonna put it in like high C. Yeah, I can't rate it that highly. Mostly the energy problem. I don't like that. I'm like a warlord, right? And I'm doing physical damage, and my default energy regen is like 15, and then this thing takes like 300 a second. It's kind of stupid, right? Anyways. Alright, Virus Might. This skill kicks butt. From a practical standpoint, it's one of the best one-point wonders in the world. Because, like, a lot of times in, like, Shattered Realm or even just normal content, you get trapped, right? And Virus Might fixes that problem for you. You can charge through enemies, which makes this skill super, super good. Also, its damage potential is pretty high. You can do bleed, you can do fire, you can probably do physical. I think you can do pierce, I haven't tried that. Also, you can get what's known as the skater build, where you literally can non-stop spam this as an attack. It's super fun. It's not really that strong, but it's super, super fun. I'm gonna give this a low S. It saves your life as a 1-point wonder. It's super fun to use. It's practical. It does pretty decent damage if you build around it. It's got lots of damage types. This is a winner, man. Actually, I'm gonna put this like, I think this is like in here. Alright, Righteous Fervor. This is freaking boring. I don't really like auto attacks to begin with, but I think this is the worst one. Maybe not like numerically the worst one, but it's boring. Like, Cadence has at least like some built-in cleave stuff with a, this one does, I guess this one does give you a buff, so it's kind of similar to Savagery, I guess. I don't know, it's just kind of meh. If I ever had an option to use different auto attack, I probably would almost always pick something else. But the attack speed buff on it is kind of okay. I don't know, it's just kind of whatever, right? It's just kind of middle of the road. It feels kind of whatever to me. I'm gonna give it like there. It's probably a little worse than these, just because of flavor and stuff. It's kind of boring, right? Actually, I think it's kind of like here. These are far more interesting. Ugh, why does this thing stubborn sometimes? Okay. Judgment. I think this is my favorite skill overall. Like, Virus Might is better, I think, but Judgment's probably my favorite skill of Oathkeeper. You can build around this, and if you max it out, it's a giant screen nuke like Alexra's, except it works against bosses. So it's like Alexra's Flash Freeze on crack, and it's just kind of better. And it also leaves like this weird aura dot on you, which I thought was kind of neat. You can put some retail on it too, which is pretty good. It's not the greatest single target, you know, it's not meant for that, but it does do a really, really good debuff in single target, so it's not useless in single target. I think for me, I'm going to put this like in A, like beneath my favorite A skills. It's not as strong as these, but it's so much fun when you build around it. So I'm going to put it in A, because looking cool and having fun is really what it's about when you're playing a game, right? Alright, Guardian of Empyrean, S. These things are fire and forget. You summon them. They do all sorts of crazy, reliable RR. They're amazing devotion proccers. They're 1-point wonders. These things are like right below Vires, I think. These things are incredible. As power-wise, they're probably a little weaker than Blade Spirits because they don't really seem to naturally do quite as much damage, because Blade Spirits just like kind of AoE because they're a big spiral of swords, right? These guys have to actually like hit things with a big hammer, so I think they're a little weaker than Blade Spirit, but they're probably among the most reliable resist reduction in the game, which is very strong. Alright, Aegis of Menhir. I will say first and foremost, this makes an amazing sound when you use this skill. The sound is so good. Bong! Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I don't really like this skill that much. I feel like the amount of targets it hits by default is too low. I would like this skill a lot better, I think, if by default it hit like 3 targets, and then maybe the additional targets scaled slower. Because at the very beginning of the game, this skill feels pretty bad. It's not very good, and it seems like it should be, but it feels painful at the beginning. It's such a slog if you start using this. So I can't really give it a super high rating. I honestly don't really like it. It disappointed me like Eye of Reckoning did. With all that aside, later on when you get it up to hitting like 9 or 10 targets, it does hit really hard. And it's a ranged weapon-based skill, which means that it heals you basically fully every time you throw it from a really far distance. So I have to put it above Eye of Reckoning for that reason, I think. So we'll put it in a low B, beneath all these fun occultist things that people like. Okay, now we're on to Shaman. Primal Strike. Where in S do I put Primal Strike? Here, maybe? Yeah, Primal Strike got everything. It looks amazing, easy to use, doesn't use too much energy, has crazy single target and AoE, has tons of support. You can use it really early, you can do it with a two-handed gun and a two-handed melee equally. It's got tons of MIs, it's just, this skill is so good for both leveling right out the gate, end game. This skill is incredible. So if you want a pretty easy leveling experience and you're new to the game, this is probably the easiest route. And then you'll have a decent character at the end too, because it never falls off. Alright, we're on to Savagery. Alright, so as far as auto attacks, it's kind of fine. It's basically the same as Righteous Fervor, honestly, but it has a little bit more built-in support with the Shaman, I think, because of the buffs that it gives you. I have a really big problem with Savagery, which I guess is a shared problem with Righteous Fervor, in that a lot of times you're an Oathkeeper or a Shaman, and you feel obligated to, like, use Savagery to try and get the second node buff up all the time, or the third node buff up all the time, which can be really awkward, even though it's kind of like the right thing to do, and I hate that. It is quite usable, though. Like, there's a lot of support for Savagery, and if you like melee auto attackers, it's pretty decent. So, I think it kind of is the same as Righteous Fervor, but I think it's better than Righteous Fervor. Maybe just because I'm biased towards lightning. I don't know. Alright, Storm Totem. S. Fun. Allows you to run around and play how I like. Very strong with both Light's Defender and Ludrigan's set, and probably some other ones that I don't know. I don't really like the Valgar's variant. Vitality Totem seems pretty weak, but Storm Totem is very strong. I'm going to kind of put it like right in here, above Devastation here. Really early on, if you don't know about this Hero Grobble location, the cooldown can be a little painful. It's still usable, but as soon as you get the offhand MI, this will carry you through the whole game. And then even in the late game, it's just really ridiculous. It does really good single target, direct, and dots. And you can do lots of weird conversions with it, but that's less effective. You probably want to keep it lightning for maximum effectiveness. Alright, Briarthorn. This is another pet that I have not used. These two are the combo that I want to use with the goals set. I have heard that the Briarthorn pet is quite good. It's got like stuns, it gives your other pets, and I think you Fizzres. It looks kind of fun. Spiky little weird plant monster looking thing. Yeah. So I'm just going to leave that there because I don't really know. Wind Devil. So this is pretty similar to the Guardian of Empyreans, but it does have a very high damage potential like Blade Spirit. Its damage potential is probably a lot higher than Blade Spirit even, but it has a really, really reliable resist reduction and an enemy slow. So if you're playing like, say, a Druid or something, which I like, and you're running around like crazy, the fact that it slows and debuffs and does a lot of damage is really good. You do have to recast them fairly frequently, which can get a little tedious, but it's not that bad because they don't die like instantly. I would probably put this like probably in here. I think I like it right about here. This is about where I'd put it. It's very strong in everything that it does, and it's not terribly hard to use. So, oh yeah, also Devotion procking. It's about as good as Blade Spirit's, right? One of the best in the game. Primal Spirit. This goes with these guys. This is the full build that the goals I think is supposed to do. Don't know. I have heard that this thing is a monster. I'm pretty sure there's some MIs you can get that will make this permanent rather than having a gap in its uptime, which sounds like something you want to do, because from what I've heard, he's a beast, literally and figuratively. Alright, Grasping Vines. This is an ability I kind of forget about a lot of times. I used this on a Conjurer build for Vitality Bleed, like pseudo-hybrid, and it feels pretty good. It's really good AoE. It slows things, so it's good support. It doesn't have very high damage potential from what I've seen, though, so it's kind of like a Curse of Frailty thing that does mediocre damage but good AoE. I'd probably just give it like a middle-of-the-road B. I think it's probably right above Canister Bomb there. Right in there. It's kind of similar to Canister Bomb, except it's less trash can at the beginning. Devouring Swarm, S. This debuff is disgusting. It's like the easiest to use, most reliable, high resist reduction for bleed and such in the game. It heals you for an absurd amount, and it's really easy to maintain, even on single target. It procs devotions like crazy. When you max it out, it can get a little energy hungry, but not really. It's fine. I think this is, honestly, this is probably like in here. Ah, what's your problem, bro? There we go. I think right about there. It's a good. If you're doing vitality, this is like ridiculously good. All right, now we're on to Soldier finally. Soldier only have 5 attacks. That's interesting. Force Wave. It's fun. Force Wave is fun. You can play it as a cooldown version or a spam version, which is fun. Although you have to use a two-hander for the spam version, you have to use a shield for the cooldown version. So that kind of forces you, limits your options a little bit. I've had great fun with both. I like both ways of playing it. Force Wave turns a soldier into a mid-range caster, which is pretty cool. I think that's the only way to get this to be a mid-range caster, really. Unless you're using some sort of really weird conduit or set at the end of the game. It's really good for leveling. It's really easy. Its AoE damage potential is extremely high, and its single target is good enough. It's good enough. If you have a lot of cast speed, it can get pretty nutty for AoE and single target. So, yeah, I'd probably give this like an A. Probably like right there. Yeah, it's a good skill. Easy to use. Good leveling skill. If you don't like Primal Strike, try Force Wave instead, maybe. Alright, Blitz. S. Blitz is like power. I don't know. I just have to put it up here. Actually, I guess we'll just put it next to Shadow Strike because it's kind of the same, right? Shadow Strike's damage potential is a lot higher than Blitz for single target specifically, but Blitz AoE damage is much higher. The DA debuff that Blitz does is very, very strong. It can get a lot of single target and AoE damage, direct and dot. It's really strong. And of course, these two are like, you know, the best movement skills for just like teleporting around the map. So that's fun. Blade Arc. Blade Arc is pretty interesting. I feel like it's kind of weak early on when your character is kind of like tends to be kind of squishy if you have to get up in range and don't kill things like immediately. That being said, later on it gets really, really strong. It can do some pretty Omega dot builds with bleed and physical. It does have the issue of reflect damage is pretty much always really, really scary when you use Blade Arc, so that's something to keep in mind. But I think I'd probably give it an A, because its power is really high, and it's pretty easy to use. And it's got a transmuter, so you can do cooldown or spam, which is nice. Counter-Strike. So this is like a retail specific skill. It just kind of like hits things as they hit you. If you apply retail damage to this skill and you have a lot of retail, it can do a lot of damage. It's probably really good mostly against like super bosses, especially like Ravager, who swings really quickly. But it's kind of, I feel like it would be a giant trash can to level with. It seems like it would be really painful. So I'm going to probably put it like at the bottom of B. No, I'm going to put it at the top of C. Because like the power level can be there, but it's kind of niche, and I feel like leveling with it is just not really a thing, right? Alright, Cadence. At the start of the game, Cadence is a slog skill, and it's not fun to use. So don't start with Cadence thinking you're gonna like be an Omega Chad and blow everything away. If you want that, go Primal Strike. That being said, at the end of the game, Cadence does kind of a disgusting amount of damage to like between 1 and 5 targets. Especially if you max your attack speed out and you're using a two-hander, you're going to start hitting for like 4 or 500k every third swing on a good build. So it scales really well with your character's power, but at the beginning it's really bad. So I think I'm going to give it a low A. I don't think I can give it lower than A because its end game power is so high that it's hard to rate it lower than that. But at the beginning of the game, it's pretty blah. Alright, so that's That's my rating for all the Grim Dawn Mastery attack skills. Yep. Cool. That was fun.